I don't think I could live without my iPod.
Definitely my phone.
My favourite thing is my computer.
My video iPad.
I would be totally lost without my laptop.
I would like to have my individual mark on time.
I don't think brands are cool, I think people are cool.
I just at no point thought about the possibility that it couldn't work.
The only thing that determines whether your message will be heard or not is whether your message is any good.
You create your own fame, and that's the difference maybe before was other people created your fame.
I'd often rip off the brands or cut them out, so I just kind of label this.
I'm motivated by changing the way things are done.
When broadband came to China, a world of opportunity opened up for us.
These tools are for everybody. They've come down to 100 quid in an internet connection.
Then, even 5 years ago, there was no choice.
We all have to change the way we live, but it doesn't have to be difficult.
I want to train people to go out into the restaurant industry and make a difference.
We have solution in our own hands.
I like to think I can provide opportunities for young people to shine.
Lucas just stole a picture of me! On YouTube, everyone loves it because there's just such a wide range of things to watch.
People don't just see the media, they are the media.
You got the world on your computer, whereas outside the door you only got your hometown.
And now please welcome on stage your host, Nikesh Arora.
Well, welcome to Zeitgeist, and thank you very much for being here. One of our founders, Larry Page, has said, at Google, we don't actually have a grand plan when we launch products because we never know how big they're going to be. So his perspective is we just launch it and see how it works. So that's what we did with Zeitgeist. Some really smart people got together in the US and said, why don't we do something where we can bring partners, customers, and just try and stimulate, lots of thinking and intellectual sort of brainstorming. And we did that. It was very successful. So some smart people in Europe got together and said, well, if they can do it, we can do it too. So last year we tried it for the first time. So either you guys are gluttons for punishment or you really liked it, that's why you're back. We'll find out during the course of the day. We hope we can make these 2 days very, very fascinating and very interesting for all of you, give you an opportunity to talk to each other, to listen to this fantastic lineup of speakers we have gathered for you. And we hope we can make it real fun. In my last job, I used to work in the mobile industry, and every time somebody touched their BlackBerry or their phone rang in such a conference, I would hear the sound of revenue. Unfortunately, I don't work in that industry anymore, so I would urge you to turn those things off and not use those, because I can say this personally, especially men, don't try and do two things at the same time. So I hope you can pay attention and listen to what's going to happen today, and it's going to be fun and exciting. And me and the entire Google team are at your disposal over the next 2 days to try and make this a wonderful event for all of you. With that, I'm probably one of the only Google people you're going to see standing up here until this evening when we have Eric Schmidt, our chairman and CEO. But before that, it's my pleasure to introduce David Miliband, who's going to open this conference for us. We usually like to try and get a true local to come and host this place. And David and I were talking earlier, and he told me his desire in life was to be a bus conductor when he was young. So clearly, he's going to have his opportunity to shepherd us through these 2 days, or kick it off for us. And he's a stalwart of the current government. He's been there for many, many, many years in different roles as head of policy and responsible for writing the Labour's election manifestos, etc. He's been an MP for the last 6 years, and currently he's the Secretary of State for the Environment. With that, David, and of course he's an Arsenal fan, but we won't hold that against him. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Nikesh. This is almost as daunting as the occasion when I was introduced to 185 to 11-year-olds at a primary school in my constituency who are sitting sort of expectantly on a Friday morning, and the headmistress welcomed me and she said, "We're so pleased you're here. Please come and meet the children. They're really looking forward to your address." And I went in, they were all sitting there looking incredibly smart with their sort of back straight, and the headmistress said, "Now children, can anyone tell us who our speaker is this morning?" And there was just complete silence all over the hall. And she said, "Now children, We did practice this yesterday. Can you please tell us, can anyone tell? By this stage, I'd arrived feeling quite sort of big for my boots, and by this stage I was getting smaller, and the poor headmistress was sort of sweatier and sweatier, and she said, children, we've talked for a long time about I'd just been made the Minister for Schools, so I thought, school kids, this would be, she said, we've been waiting a long time for someone who's going to make a real difference to our school. You know many of the things that we want, how we want to go forward, how we want to do better. Can anyone tell us who this really important visitor is? And finally, this little boy put up his hand and said, Miss, is it the man who's come to fix the electricity? So from that moment on, this is almost as daunting because I sort of feel I'm moving from a political world into a different world. And I suppose what I want to talk about today is what's the connection between the world of politics and the world that you are creating, and perhaps try and say, how can we import into the world of politics some of the ethos and values and innovation in your world. I've got a speech here, which I think the worst thing I could do at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning is read it out. So if anyone's interested, just if you click onto the DEFRA website or presumably somewhere on the Google system, you'll be able to access it. I'll try and sum up what I'm saying, and I think there's some time for comments and questions. I thought I'd start with Zeitgeist, title of the conference. What does one do? One goes not to the Oxford English Dictionary anymore, one goes to Wikipedia. And the Latin root is guardian spirit, but of course, in modern parlance, it means spirit of the times. And I think that there's a common challenge for business and for politics, and it is to be as close to the spirit of the times as is necessary to make you relevant and useful, but as far ahead of the spirit of the times as for you to be a force for change. And certainly that's the way I see the task of politics, and from what I understand of what you do, that's the way you see your task. And I guess that the argument I want to make today is that the challenge for our society in the years ahead is threefold. It is to make the distribution of power in our society as dispersed as the distribution of information, which, thanks to the work that you're doing, I think is more dispersed than ever. Secondly, it's to arrange a coordination and collective action and cooperation in new ways to match the nature of the interdependence that we have, that defines our lives locally and internationally. And thirdly, it's to take the economic and social and cultural relationships that define the world you're creating and import them into politics. And I want to try and address that from a British point of view. I hope it has relevance to the rest of the European audience and also to a North American audience. And my starting point is what I think is quite a profound change that's going on in our society in the UK. You can tell me whether it's happening in your societies too, in your countries as well. Because in Britain, after the Second World War, politics and society was, if I had to capture a phrase that defined our society, it was I need. People said, I need healthcare, I need housing, I need employment, I need economic security. Born of the sacrifice of the Second World War, born of the austerity of the 1930s, the defining ethos of that society was I need. And a whole set of institutions, social institutions, political institutions, companies grew up to satisfy that desire. There was a relative passivity on the part of citizens, but they were demanding levels of provision that I've described. Over the course of the 60s, the 70s, and then into the 1980s in our country, that was superseded by a different ethos, and the ethos became not I need, but I want. There was a new demand for essentially the goods and services that had become available to an elite to become available on a mass scale, and that was summed up by the idea of looking after number one, and I want became the defining characteristic of politics, and I think of business as well. I think there's a new spirit in the country at the moment, and it's not I need, and it's not I want. I would sum it up as I can. People have a sense that they want to make more decisions, exercise more power, exercise more control over their economic, social, and other relationships. And it's everything from the old age pensioner in my constituency who fears antisocial behavior and wants to have more say over local policing. It's the 23-year-old who finds out that he or she is too old for the apprenticeship scheme that they want to get into, but it's also the people who are blogging to me, going onto my blog and making comments from farm, because I'm the Secretary of State for Agriculture as well as the Secretary of State for Environment. It's the farmer and the farmer's wife who are blogging onto my blog to say, look, you're getting this wrong, you're getting that wrong. It is a spirit that says, I can make more decisions for myself. And I just want to explain that and try and draw it out, because I think the idea is that people want to be players, not just spectators. We live in a society where the audience, if you like, has gone onto the stage. And I feel that very strongly in politics, and I'm sure that you feel it very, very strongly in business. And even in the 40 seconds of the video there, you heard, I think, that spirit from those people being interviewed, people from around the world, not just from the UK. What does it mean to say, I can? What are the aspects of that spirit? I think there are three aspects to it that I want to draw out, three facets that are about the dispersal of power, that are about the flattening of hierarchies, and about new forms of collective action. Let me try and explain this. I can create my own content. That's what was happening on the video there. In other words, the tools of production have been radically redistributed. When there was an earthquake, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say an earthquake in Kent, not many injured, but there was an earthquake in Kent last month. The reporters and the cameramen were local residents, supplying information to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world, actually, about this earthquake in Kent. The South Korean newspaper, you probably know more about it than I do, Oh My News, has as its masthead, every citizen a reporter. That seems to me to be a world where people are saying, I can create my own content. Second aspect to it, the tools of distribution have been radically transformed as well. We don't have to depend on mass distribution companies to distribute. We can distribute our own content. MySpace, YouTube, etc. You know this much better than I do. People are able to distribute. The costs of distribution have been totally slashed. But I think there's a third aspect to this which is really makes this a different era. People can collaborate in new ways as well. It's not just I can create, it's not just I can connect, which is what the distribution channels do. It's also I can collaborate, and Wikipedia is obviously an example of that, Linux as well. And I think it's that transition to a world where people can't just do things for themselves, but they can cooperate with others, that has very, very big implications for the nature of politics in our country. In other words, I can, which could be simply an individualistic credo, becomes we can. And it's about how we solve collective problems, not just address individual ones. And I think that is really important. Because while people, I think, feel more and more power over aspects of their personal life, as you saw on the video, as you experienced in your daily life, the things that people feel lack of power over are collective goods. A stable climate, safety, security. Those collective goods are actually things over which people feel less power rather than more. So we've got this paradox. People feel they've got more power in their own hands in their personal lives. They feel they've got less power in their hands over collective goods. And that maybe explains why, if you look at opinion polls from any country in the world, there's a mismatch between the optimism people feel about their personal lives and the pessimism they feel about social environment in which they live. So bridging the gap between I can and we can becomes absolutely critical to the future of our societies. And you'll have to tell me if this is right, but my understanding is that essentially you're creating a different world through the technology that you're developing and that you're distributing. If you think that the origins of the internet were a closed system designed to preserve information and hold it within a national bureaucracy, we're now talking about radically open systems with Web 2.0, etc., etc. Think about previous technological revolutions. Robert Putnam's work says that television turned people inwards rather than outwards. If you look at measures of social capital and the way in which people engage with each other, trust in politics, Robert Putnam's work argues that television actually turned people inwards and turned people away from society. Your world turns them outwards and helps them connect. And as I say, this addresses collective issues as well as individual issues. That, I would say this because I'm the Environment Secretary, the biggest collective issue is global warming. I think it's a very interesting question to ask yourself. If you wanted to export or import the values that are represented in this room into the international fight against climate change, how would you do it? You wouldn't necessarily say that governments negotiating treaties are a waste of time, but I think you would say that local initiatives like Manchester is My Planet, which says that the citizens of Manchester are going to come together with web-based tools to pledge themselves to change their own local environment and make a contribution to the fight against climate change, becomes quite a big agenda. And I think that our challenge is to take that spirit that started out as I can do more for myself, that I think has the potential to become we can do more together using the technology that's been developed. I think we can take that to address a whole range of public policy problems that seem to bedevil modern societies. As I say, the environmental one I think is the prime example. I think it is matched, though, in other public policy arenas. If you think about education, I used to be a schools minister. Yeats said that education should be about lighting a fire, not just filling a pail. That isn't done between 9 o'clock in the morning and 3:30 in the afternoon with a teacher simply standing in front of a class of pupils. It's actually pupils becoming active learners 24/7, not just during the school day. That requires something more than the relationship between a teacher and their pupil. It requires us to think that all of us can become not full-time teachers, but actually people who are helping kids in their learning. Everything that we do, because we're living in an open world, becomes accessible to kids who are trying to develop their own talents. So in the same way that Oh My News says every citizen a journalist, I'm not saying every citizen a teacher, but actually it's not crazy to think that the work that we all do does become a learning resource for kids all over the country, or actually all over the world. In respect of energy, huge issues of energy security, the principles of dispersal of power, the principles of open systems, actually you can apply them there as well. Thomas Edison invented the world's first thermal power station in this country in the middle of the 19th century. We have a system of very centralized energy distribution. It's very mainframe if you look at our energy distribution system. Actually, the energy system of the future is going to have far more decentralized energy. What do I mean by that? In this country, in 10 years' time, every new house is going to have to export as much energy to the grid as it imports. Through the development of solar power, through wind, every single house is going to have to be, at best, zero carbon. Or, beg your pardon, worse, zero carbon. It's going to have to at least export as much. So a radically decentralized system of energy comes onto the agenda. You can even, I think this is slightly wacky, but my advisors thought it was interesting, you can even think about transport. At the moment, the choice you face in transport is there's public transport which has standardized routes which may not be relevant to where you're trying to go. Or you can take your private car and you run the risks of congestion and blockage. Actually, a world where 20% of the population, a fifth of the population, rather than a fraction, were actually involved in carpooling, where coming here, you'd actually have come on a car-sharing basis, where commuting suddenly became an issue of collective responsibility and collective organization. You're into a different world there too. And I think we've only just started to understand some of the implications for public policy systems that remain Web 1.0 systems rather than Web 2.0 systems. And I think that in the world of politics, we've got to find a way of bridging that gap. So I guess my way of starting this conference is to say they're unlikely bedfellows in a way, your world and the government world, but actually we've got to find a way of living better together. I think if I were, one question that you could say to me is, well, why are you passionate about this? What difference does it make to you? And there are two answers I'd give to that. One is that it's changing political practice. Your world is changing political practice. If you look at the Move On organization in the States, 15 staff, 268,000 activists, 3.3 million members. That is the sort of gearing that any political party would give its right arm for. So the world of politics is changing, but also my politics is actually about giving people more power over their own lives and over their social environment. It's about self-efficacy, it's about collective efficacy. And unless we can bridge the gap that allows people to have more say and more control over the collective sphere, then they're going to become more and more angry about it. Because the truth is, in the private world, they have got more power over themselves. Every previous technological revolution has had a huge time lag between the development of the technology, whether it be transport or electricity or you name it, and the development of social institutions that mirror it. The truth is we can't afford that sort of decades-long time lag in the transformation of our social institutions, especially our government institutions, but also our public services, in response to the changes that are going on in your world. So I would say to you that as well as leading by example, you can force us to confront some of the rigidities and difficulties and blockages that exist in our systems. I'll be staying for the rest of this morning. If I learn nothing else, it will be to learn what are the right questions that we should be asking about our system in the months and years ahead. Thank you very much indeed.
We're going to let people ask some questions. You can't escape so easily. This is a highly energized, stimulated intellectual audience. So, questions for David? We can't let him get away so quickly. And he's not here to fix the electricity. So. There are mics, please. Feel free to use the mics.
Secretary of State, thank you very much indeed for a fantastic introduction to this year's Zeitgeist. And I totally agree with you that we are moving to a we can society. But I'm wondering whether you could comment on the fact that voter turnout in the UK is on the decrease. And we saw recently in France that there was a voter turnout, I think, of about 85%, whereas in this country now it's coming on to half the electorate actually turn out to vote. And therefore there seems to be quite a lot of apathy and dissolution. And I'm not blaming the current government for that. But I think there is a younger generation that does feel disenfranchised. And I'm wondering, Secretary of State, what you would suggest to try and ameliorate that situation.
Well, it's a really good question. I think none of us, whether we're in the government or not, should just try and escape the blame. I mean, I think that I'd say three things about that. I mean, the first is it runs a danger of being glib, but I think has something to it. If elections aren't close, people don't turn out. I mean, the biggest driver of higher turnout in the French election was the fact that people thought there was a lot to play for and it was going to be close. If you look at constituencies in our country where it's very close between Labour and the Tories, you get 70, 80% of people turning out. If overall, though, it's not close, there's much less incentive to turn out. But as I don't think one should just, I don't want to hide behind that because I think there are more profound things. Secondly, politics feels like a very clunky world compared to the world that people inhabit in their daily lives. In this country, I think there's a particular reason for that, which is politics is so focused on Westminster. I'm a great believer that we need much greater pluralism in the distribution of power. Britain in the 19th century wasn't run from London. Britain in the 19th century was run from the towns and cities of Britain. We ran an empire from London, but we didn't run our own country from London. We ran it through dispersed power. And I'd like to see much greater pluralism in our systems of power because I think that's an important basis of political engagement. But the third part of it is the most profound in a way, which is that how does representative democracy live with a world of I can? The Swiss answer to that is that you have permanent referenda. I don't think that's really the answer. But I think it is a profound challenge to 650 people in the House of Commons to say, well, you're representing us, well, how are you in touch with us? And the truth is that whether it's me through my blog or the Number 10 website through their petitions, we're only scratching the surface for how you have ongoing engagement with people that actually really gives them a say in the course of a democratic mandate. So those are the areas that I'd be trying to look at. Although I should say, I'm not advocating that we make elections as close as possible. I'm sort of...
You just quoted an example with regards to the generation of news. I come from a news organization, and you spotted rightly that obviously we're now entering the era of user-generated news, like Oh My News or other examples. I think what I'm looking for in the debates on the subject is really who's to regulate the news that is generated in that way. What is your opinion in that respect? Should it be regulated at all? Should it be regulated by the users, by businesses, or by governments?
God, I mean, usually at this point, I sort of say, let's take questions in groups of 3 so that I can dodge the most difficult ones. I mean, I think that there's this idea, isn't there, wisdom of crowds, and that's how people vet their own, will provide their own vetting. I'm sort of skeptical of a regulated solution because you're not going to regulate people with their mobile phones taking pictures of earthquakes. I just don't think it's going to happen. I suppose there are a whole range of issues for organizations that are funded through public service and have got public service obligations, but I mean, well, you tell me. What would the regulated solution be? I can't see you.
Well, I think I'll take probably a rather old-fashioned approach and say that there have to be journalistic ethics. On the other hand, I do concede that we have, for instance, in the example of the tsunami, which was probably one of the first big examples, in a way benefited from pictures that came from users and had a much bigger idea or better idea of what was happening on the ground. But I do believe that there needs to be some kind of institution that regulates so that the users can distinguish between what's based on fact or not fact. And another example is probably, or was probably in the past year, the Lebanon war, where a lot of user-generated news appeared on the web and around the media, and there was a big discussion going on about what of it was manipulated and what was not. I don't think it should be over-regulated, but I think, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you go into all these conferences. We actually had this discussion here last year, and we were all sitting around scratching our heads, and we don't come up with an answer.
Well, look, let me tell you, as you were talking, I think one example and possibly an answer came into my head was, in a way, there are 2 approaches. You can either say, look, there's all this stuff out there. I don't know who we is, government or the state or something, has got to regulate it. And, in a way, you can't regulate or legislate for ethics. Either journalists have ethics, and journalistic systems have ethics, or they don't have ethics, and you've got a problem. It's quite hard to legislate for it. However, there is an alternative to regulation, which is that you have independent, trusted arbiters of what is fact and what is fiction. In our last general election campaign, Channel 4 set up something which they called a fact check, but was in fact a lie check. And basically every claim made by any political party or any politician was put up on there, and so independent experts would say this is a lie or this is a fact. And I think that is, if you like, a way of regulate. It doesn't regulate by preventing people from doing things, but it tries to establish a trusted third party that can provide authentic information about what's a lie and what's a fact. And I guess I would be more, if I think about this as a consumer as much as a politician, I would want to, maybe even as a politician, I'd as much want to check a genuinely independent, genuinely respected website as I would my own lines to take that come from the department and say what's right and what's wrong. And I think that might be the most modern way, the most in tune with the times way of providing the sort of authenticity and corroboration that you want. Because I don't see who or how the quote-unquote regulation happens.
David, I've been asked to jump in and protect you from any more tough questions, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for kicking us off.